Welcome to Press Coverage. I'm Theo Gremminger. At Press Coverage, I'm looking to help you find the edges you need to win in fantasy football. I'm looking to bring on the sharpest guests possible. And this is a really, really kind of challenging week for us as fantasy managers. Last week was absolute injury carnage, a bloodbath, a massacre. Any way you want to talk about it, Alan, it was about as wild as it gets. We even lost Evan Engram in warmups. Like, guys are dropping like flies. And it's, if you're a heavy duty fantasy player like yourself, it's one of the most like demoralizing and helpless feelings in life when you lose like your first round pick and maybe two players off your fantasy. Like, people who are not in this thing of ours are not able to process that feeling where I can't just put in DeMarcus Robinson for Cooper Kupp because they replace Cooper Kupp in aggregate and it makes the offense go down. Like, people don't understand that. This is not just like paint by numbers where you get a bunch of Jordan Masons. It's a lot of the times it's nothing like that. How are you holding up, my man?
First of all, that Jets-Patriots game last night, what a finish. What a finish to that game last night. It's unbelievable.
And just just to show how the sausage is made here at Press Coverage, a lot of shows at Player Profiler. We are actually recording this on Thursday. I beg Alan not to mention the Patriots game. And so we start out with it. But Alan, you're the best. Everybody at Player Profiler loves you. Me and you have podcasted literally 1,000 times at this point.
Yeah.
But let everybody know kind of what you have going on, like your weekly routine, things you need to see. I was on with Jeff Radcliffe last night on his show, Rotowire to the Moon.
Oh,
right?
Jeff Erickson, not Radcliffe.
Oh, excuse me. I confused my Jeff Erickson. Sorry about that.
Yeah. This is what I tell people. You need to find me. You have to do it on your own. I'm not telling anybody what I'm working on anymore. You have to literally, you have to go find, if you want it so bad, you need to go find me. That's it. Screw you.
So you can find him over at Rotowire YouTube and also on Sirius Satellite Radio.
Yeah.
Alan is routinely on the airwaves there. I had a chance to go on with him last week. That was a lot of fun. Always. Shout out to Shannon. Shout out to all the people over there at Sirius making the shows work, Alan. And then are you doing the Sunday Sirius as well?
Yeah, if you have satellite radio, Sundays 9 a.m., we're just on there doing like every injury update and just, like setting your lineup stuff. All the stuff that like when you're drinking your coffee in the morning or having your breakfast, going through your lineups, like just flip it on and once in a while you'll hear something that's like an update or something like that. So 9 a.m. Eastern, Channel 87.
Now, getting back to the injuries, Alan, do you have any teams that are dealing with like 2 or 3 injuries on one team?
Yes. It seems like I have. I didn't realize how much Cooper Kupp I had until injury struck. I have one team, Theo, that has Puka, Cooper Kupp. This is a dynasty team, of course. Nick Chubb, TJ Hawkinson. Like my IR is filled already, right? So I'm starting like Greg Dortch, Tyler Johnson. I'm pushing people out of the way to get Carson Steele. I mean, it's just. It's so ugly. And like you use the word demoralizing. You're right. Like, I'm just like, okay, quitting this league next year. Like, and obviously when you start winning again, because you give up like when you're 0-4 or 0-3, whatever it is. But you come back. And I think that's what people have to remember. Like I'm already getting low ball offers in a lot of these dynasty leagues for Aaron Rodgers because I'm 0-4 and 0-4 because we play 2 games a week in a lot of these leagues, Theo. And I'm like, no, I'm not giving up yet, but it just goes to show. I think that there are low ball offers to be made. So yeah, I'm getting crushed with injuries just like everybody else.
Yeah, it's really Alan nailed it. It's a weekly game. It's you have to have more of a DFS mindset this season. A lot of the fill-ins, a lot of week-to-week values, a lot of churn on the waiver wire. This is a year where every year we see waiver wire guys pop. This is a year where it's going to be like that, maybe even more so because of short-term opportunities. Not every waiver wire ad is going to be Puka Nacua or Kyron Williams, a guy who gives you the entire season or almost a whole season. There's going to be plenty of guys who are like Devin Singletary last year, which you pick up, and then he gives you like 6 really strong weeks. That's going to happen over and over again. And we're going to talk about some of those injury replacements a little later in the show. But gosh, some of these lineups, it's like I have a team with Nelson Sousa. Check out Fantasy Empire, really strong show here at Player Profiler. But we do a New York Super Team in the NFFC, which is like a really difficult league. I thought we drafted well this year, and we took Jamar Chase when he falls to the 110s. We've dealt with the slow start, still win week 1, and end up with Cooper Kupp in the 2nd round, and we took Ken Walker in the 4th round.
Yeah, I mean,
so this team is just like, how can you recover from that?
Well, the right picks this year were in round 1 was Breece Hall in round 1. Round 2, it was Nico Collins, right? If you then in round 3 took Neighbors, you were good. I mean, if you got into the later rounds and you took round 4, if you took Rice, you were good. Even Devontae Adams is a hit so far. Once you got into those like 7 through 10 rounds, the right picks were players I didn't want. I mean, Chris Godwin was a right call. Jamison Williams, those were the right picks so far. I mean, it's only 2 weeks, but right now, if we redrafted, Chris Godwin would be a second-round pick. Nico Collins, a top 6 pick, Theo?
I traded for Chris Godwin in a league like yesterday morning. I have a Brock Bowers team with some tight end depth and also a Mark Andrews share. And I traded Mark Andrews for Chris Godwin plus in an FFPC Dynasty league, just like I'm there. So there is a lot to be said, but we're going to try to help you win this week. We're not just throwing darts. We want to be calculated. Alan and I are going to talk about 10 important things that you need to know heading into week 3 that are going to help you win. But before we do that, Alan, we got to talk about the Kansas City backfield because there's a lot of polarizing opinions on this. Which Kansas City back did you add this week, or did you pass on them entirely on the wire? And which is sort of the way you see it falling in line? And I'll also throw out Hunt is on the practice squad, but we have CEH around the corner. So it's not just Carson Steele and Samaje Perine. This could be a real mess, is my opinion. Your thoughts?
Well, what's good is that if you pick up Kareem Hunt, at least you have the Kansas City kicker should anything happen to Harrison Butker.
There you go. Too much.
Yeah, too soon.
Too
soon. Now, I'm putting the chip on Carson Steele, and it's not that, like you said, the committee is real, right? And Keontae Ingram is presumably going to be involved in the short term as well. So it's not that any one of these guys, like they could all have like 6 fantasy points this week, but this is the week that you have to pick them up, right? Steele's going to be the most expensive. And then P. Ryan, if he's not already rostered, is presumably, either it's right there. It's like, and then, Hunt is going to garner the smallest bid because he's on the practice squad. But 3 weeks from now, one of them will probably be the right answer, right? Like someone else will get hurt. Someone else will have, will fail for performance wise. But so it's making your bet, not just on week 3, Theo, but and again, it's just literally a spin of the roulette wheel. It could end up being Kareem Hunt. Like you said, CH, I would probably doubt that because, look, he's suffering from some mental.
He's absolutely CH.
And he's also suffering from, some mental trauma. That's tough, Look, it could end up being Keontae Ingram, right? I mean, it really could be. It's unlikely, but he's the free pickup if you want him. So I've bet on Carson Steele. I paid as much as 47%, way too much. The next highest bid was 18%. It was because I'm the Pacheco guy.
47%.
It was the wrong call. But listen, I didn't know. In that league, people go crazy. And then I got him in a bunch of other leagues for like 12 and 15%. But I think I'd set that bid before the Kareem Hunt signing. I just never went back to fix it.
The best nickname for Carson Steele right now is Kareem Hunt.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. That's a good one for sure. I didn't mean to offend anybody with the Kareem Hunt kicker joke. I don't even know if anybody.
It went over most people's heads until you just said it again, and now they're going to Google and be like, "Why is this offensive?" There you go, Alan. Way to keep it going. So we talk about, you've seen it with Jordan Mason, you've seen it in terms of usage with Zach Charbonnet, and we're going to talk about the Seattle offense shortly. But is there a handcuff you wish you had on all of your rosters right now, like looking across the league?
Oh, Theo, let's say it together. Let's say Braylon Allen on 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3, Braylon Allen, right? I mean,
it's Braylon Allen.
Yeah. You have to wonder why none of the other teams took him in the 3rd round of the real NFL draft.
It's and dynasty wise, it's sort of for me is like a stick to your convictions, like draft capital. We're not trying to go dynasty today. This is a redraft show, but I do a ton of rookie draft preparation, rookie rankings at Player Profiler. Like we go deep into the weeds. And my initial projection for our rookie drafts was Braylon Allen was the RB1 in the class. Jonathan
pre-draft. This is pre-draft.
This is like well before we even like early on. Like I had Braylon Allen early on as the RB1. I'd have to pull up the month, but my thinking was Jonathan Brooks. We had a little less injury clarity at the time. He hadn't even declared. I had Jonathan Brooks after him, but Trey Benson after him. But Braylon Allen was a guy like I liked, and then a lot of people pushed back and said that you're too high on him. Then the combine comes, he doesn't run the 40, gets drafted in the 4th round, but he had so much production in college. His reception total went up his last year at Wisconsin. was never a guy who caught any passes, like a former linebacker, but he was on a Big Ten football field at 17 years old producing.
Theo, this goes back to the conversation we had before you flipped the on switch. You are someone that watches basically every snap of every game. You study the football games like the Torah, for Christ's sakes. You should trust your observations, right? But it's hard. When everyone's pushing back the other way, it's hard. This guy's going to be ready for his second contract when he's 23 and a half, 24 years old.
You nailed it. 20-year-old running back, like what he did last week, 20 years old and two touchdowns. And also, Alan, the fact that he got 4 targets, you nailed it. It's the handcuff you want, because
he does it all.
If Breece Hall went down, he would do it all. And 20 years old. So
if Breece Hall said he wasn't playing this week, what number running back would he be ranked right now in like the consensus rankings?
Well,
3,
you'd
5?
have to. I think you'd have to adjust the offense as a whole, but I think he'd be somewhere as a low end RB1, not a high end RB1.
Let me ask you this: Breece, you think there's much difference between him and Breece Hall?
I think that Breece Hall is a far, far more natural pass catcher. Can do a lot more things. So I think for me, it would be you get less high value touches than with like Breece Hall, where you getting this crazy amount of targets. Like Braylon Allen, like 4 targets. That's like I don't think you're going to see weeks where it's like so much higher. I don't think this is some Le'Veon Bell type situation. Maybe I'm wrong.
Hey, let's do it. Let's do it real quick. All right. So this is the actionable intel for people. Like if he's still out, he was only rostered 17%.
We can't go full deep on this one because we're again airing after the Thursday night game. But it's Braylon Allen. Make sure you're out there rostering a bunch of these high end handcuffs. Anytime you get a handcuff opportunity, like this is what you want, especially in a year of attrition, where you oftentimes get more like for like value by rostering these handcuffs than trying to play darts with like these backup wide receivers or anything like that. Just sort of a.
But if he's dropped after Thursday, Theo, because he does nothing, because it's just like the Breece Hall show, like he's like a priority pickup before Sunday's games.
Yeah, I mean, all these guys like Bucky Irving, Tank Bigsby, Trey Benson. These are all guys that are going to have opportunities that at some point are going to be in the wire. Benson did nothing, has done nothing so far. James Conner's rolling. We're going to talk about that Arizona offense as well. Let's actually take a quick break, and we come back. We're going to talk about week 3. We're going to get you ready. We're going to go through 10 things we think you need to know to win in week 3.
Hey, this will just take a second. I want to talk about our player rankings, the weekly rankings, the weekly projections. Billy, Theo, and our analytics geniuses getting your start, sit decisions dialed in that flex tab. And then you get the season rankings. Want to make add drop decisions? The season rankings are updated every week all year. And you have the best dynasty rankings ever as part of the player rankings package. And don't forget the offensive line rankings. Dan Fornick, one of the best in the business. New running back starting this week. Hey, is that offensive line top 10? Yeah, okay, start them. And we rank the cornerbacks out to like CB100 with the corresponding receiver they're going to be matched up with most this coming week. The player rankings are the thing you need during the season on playerprofiler.com. Check it out.
Welcome back to Press Coverage. Theo Gremminger with the great Alan Seslowsky of Rotowire /Sirius /Jacksonville, Florida /whatever.
We're going to give out my social security number now? Slash.
You can find Alan's address right here in the show chat. Let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals. Week 1, everything's going really, really well for them early on, and then they sort of fall off against Buffalo. But then we saw sort of the complete package in week 2. Marvin Harrison Jr., a collective sigh of relief for the fantasy community and the dynasty community, catching 2 touchdown passes, looking very much like we anticipated with him. Kyler Murray looks unbelievable. James Conner looks really, really good, like 5.5 yards a carry. Everything's rolling, Alan. Is this like a dark horse team for you in the NFC? How are you treating these skill position players in Arizona?
Yeah, with the 7 playoff spots available in the conference, they'll probably get the 7 seed at minimum, maybe even a little bit more, right? I mean, the Rams in that division are completely eviscerated. It's a 3-team division at this point.
They might be. I mean, if you look at the lack of attrition on their roster versus San Francisco versus, Seattle already losing Ken Walker and Seattle having 2 very, again, wins are wins in the NFL, but Seattle gets the 2 close victories over teams that not exactly impressive. I think we'll find out a lot more about Seattle in the upcoming weeks, but this Miami week, this week for Seattle, they get, Skylar Thompson too. We won't really learn anything there. But I don't know. Arizona looks awesome. So yeah. Keep it going.
Yeah, no, Arizona they're going to be fun for fantasy, right? Like, I have to admit, like, I was calling people morons for taking Marvin Harrison Jr. at the 1-2 turn. I was like, how stupid are you? And then after week 1, I didn't say anything, but I was like, man, was that a good take? And then after I came back in week 2, I was like, man, was that a bad take? So it doesn't even matter if he has a bad week 3. I'm not going to flip flop on this a billion times. Like, we already saw the upside, right? Like, once you see the upside, like, that's the upside. So I guess it was a good pick. He'd probably go in the same spot. And the interesting part, I mean, James Conner, we all knew was a great pick, right? Like, in the 6th round, he's a top 12 running back when he plays. I mean, he's RB8 right now on the season. Trey McBride in a bad tight end year. We didn't mention him. Like, at least he's holding par, right?
Oh, I mean, Trey McBride to me is like, this is tight end 1 overall material just based on the usage. Like, the guy's target share, the guys, role, they're using him in the slot. Like, we're going to have these huge spike weeks from him.
Yeah.
Trey
well,
McBride,
he did get a cheap touchdown last week. It was a cheap touchdown.
Sure. But like, the metrics are solid.
Yeah.
Like I'm into Trey McBride big time. I think Marvin Harrison Jr., you nailed it.
And how about Dortch? You into Dortch?
I had some Dortch. I feel like it's kind of a roster clogger. He's going to have useful games. He's a little bit more of a better in best ball one, especially with, like, I don't know. There's going to be games where Greg Dortch, we'll probably have a little bit more of an idea of the games you can start Greg Dortch in. Maybe it's against teams with strong pass rushes, but we just don't know enough about, like, how to predict that. Dortch has led them in targets in like 4 out of the last 10 games, which is not anything to kind of scoff at, but his ceiling is so low, Alan, that he really needs to be peppered to give you anything significant. So again, your lineup. If you need 12 points, 10 points to get through the week, then Greg Dortch is viable. But if you need a guy who can give you a 20-pointer, he's certainly not that.
Dortch, 8 targets in week 1. That was kind of cool, right? So that shows you that he, like you said, he can be an 8 target for 45-yard type of player. And I think, Michael Wilson's been a little bit of a disappointment so far. Caught the touchdown in week 1. I've had to play him in a couple 14-team leagues. I thought he would be a little bit more involved, and I still think that could happen here, especially if it's going to be a pinball machine type of offense. And I think, but by the way, everything we're saying comes back to that Kyler Murray should have been drafted where Anthony Richardson was getting drafted.
Yes.
And you were getting 2-round discount on him in drafts.
Yeah, Kyler Murray looks really, really locked in. I think this is one where just continue starting your Cardinals. My biggest take on the Cardinals is with the efficiency of this offense and the way that James Conner looks, Trey Benson is a guy that I want to have on my rosters. James Conner misses time every single year, and he's an older back. And I think that's the Cardinals kind of know that. Like, the guy gives you 13 games a year, and this means valuable starts for Trey Benson. Any week he's in the starting lineup, he's for the Cardinals, he'd be in your starting lineup. Michael Carter not there, and the Amari DiMercato threat is not nearly as high as they're making it out to be when push comes to shove. Alan, this is I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think Benson would replace Conner 1-to-1, or it would be like I thought DiMercato and Benson would be more of a committee if Conner went down?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I think it would probably be DiMercato taking away some targets, but with the efficiency of that offense and the way that they're able to churn out explosive runs, Benson would be an RB2, a really fun one as well with big playability. So I'm into rostering Benson. I think that story has not been told fully for the year. Let's talk about the Saints. This is probably the first time all week long on any of your shows that you've had to discuss Clint Kubiak and the New Orleans Saints. So this will be a fun one for you, Alan. But the New Orleans Saints, is this a fugazi team where they're going to fall off, or is this is one of the best teams in the NFC and they're here to stay? Your prediction for their game against Philly this week, their score against Philly this week.
Yeah. Do you remember when we used to play fantasy football 20 years ago? The edge was actually just like reading sites like Rotowire and just like understanding who the wide receiver 3 was. Now everyone has every piece of information there is. So the edge in fantasy football, in my opinion, is reacting before everyone else does. Is this for real? No, it's for real, right? Like, you either have to take that stance or not take that stance. So last week I took the stance that the Saints were real. Now I'm going to get a million things wrong, but the only reason I'm saying this is that last week my buddy was in like quarterback dire straits, and I said, I bet this week before week 2, I said, go buy Derek Carr in Superflex because he needed a quarterback. He's like, I don't want to buy that guy. He sucks. I go, but what if he doesn't, right? Like, what if it's good? You already saw week 1. So he didn't, right? And I understand why he didn't. So it's like, how many more weeks are you going to wait until you find out it's real? It's like the Puka Nacua thing from last year. Buy him for a third. What a sucker bought him for a third. Oh, buy him for a second. Oh, buy him for a first. Oh, buy him for 2 firsts, right? So it's reacting. So I'm going to take the stance that it is for real, right? That, Rashid Shaheed, every week starter at this point, I would have him as a top 25 wide receiver. And, you could say that Olave will come around, but if you're talking about rest of season production, they're 50-50 right now between those 2 receivers. So you have 2 Chris Olave level type of receivers as far as production. Add in those tight ends. You have Taysom Hill and Derek Carr, who wasn't too long ago. He was an MVP candidate. I'm in on the Saints. I think they're going to beat up Philly.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I would, if I would have told you, Alan, in July that the Saints are favorites over the Eagles in week 3, then you would have said you're full of it, or you would have said that Jalen Hurts got a significant injury. The offensive line play for New Orleans is so strong. There's and I don't even know why I'm plugging this. I don't know the guy, but it was one of the best articles I read was on CBS by Chris Trapasco. I think I'm saying his name correctly. But he wrote an article just breaking down how this scheme is working. And really, Clint Kubiak is just some sort of a genius. He's doing like concepts that are a little bit different. They're keeping in multiple blockers. They're having routes where they're running like only 2 guys downfield, only 2 options for Carr, and then leaking out Kamara. Like really, really interesting stuff. And they're protecting Carr at such an interesting rate.
The preseason rankings had the Saints as one of the bottom 5 offensive lines. That's why you can't look at that stuff, because offensive line isn't like a player or a group of players. It's a cohesion thing.
Yes.
It's how they're coached. It's how they come along. It's like, yes, when you take Jason Kelce out of the Eagles line, that's bad. But as they move along and the season go on and they get cohesive, it becomes a better line. So I think that's also a takeaway when you hear all these noisy stats about offensive line stuff.
Devon Achane playing unbelievable football, giving you high-end RB1 production every week. The volume is more than even Devon Achane enthusiasts like myself could have dreamed of. Everything's right there. Now we lose Tua Tagovailoa. Alan, do you adjust Devon Achane in your rankings with Skylar Thompson behind center, or is there some sort of path where he could actually be more valuable this week?
I mean, how much are you going to lower him, right? Like, if not you, the proverbial you, what are you going to put him below Tony Pollard, who's a top 12 running back at this point? You put Devon Achane in there and you manage your expectations. You don't lower his ranking, right? Like if he's on your team, there's 0 chance you're not starting him every week until, unfortunately, if he, has to miss some time. Devon Achane's ADP was always right or wrong, depending on what you thought. He was right. Like, if people were victory lapping that, oh, look, I told you should have been a 1st-round pick. It's like everyone knew on a per game basis he was going to be at like where Jahmyr Gibbs was getting drafted. The reason he went in the 2nd or 3rd round was because there is that risk or perceived risk of missing time. So I would not adjust him, but you just adjust your expectations. He might not be 25 a game. He might be 17 a game.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. I think devil's advocate will be he's going to get more dump off in the backfield with Skylar Thompson, just sort of the check down merchant. What is more interesting is just how badly does this affect Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. I mean, some people are saying this is going to be just sort of the end of days for the wide receiver production. It's a smart offensive coordinator. Miami's not off to the start that they're used to. The Jacksonville game was weird. The Buffalo game was ugly. They've got some issues, but I do have faith in this coaching staff to self-scout. And I think we will see at least low-end wide receiver 1 numbers from Tyreek Hill without Skylar. I don't know if I'm being too optimistic.
Yeah.
Waddle, we're going to need to see the targets, but at least it could be even more consolidated with those 3 than even we're used to. So
Jonnu was good though. Jonnu Smith. I mean,
yes, he was.
He popped off the page, right? I was like, oh, who's that? Number 9. Oh, that's Jonnu Smith. I forgot he's good when he gets the ball. So I mean, he's going to be part of it. And the other thing is, I like that they signed Tyler Huntley.
Yeah,
because if Skylar Thompson has like the disaster 2 interception half, we at least know Huntley is capable of he's like a poor man's or like an old school Tyrod Taylor. He can run the offense and probably breathe life back into the receiver. So it's not a complete, even if like Tua is going to miss at least 4 games. So if things go south with Thompson, at least there's like a respectable backup there.
I actually think like Huntley is a decent football player. We saw those weeks when he replaced Lamar Jackson, gave us some very solid fantasy production. It's sort of just how quickly can he adapt to the Mike McDaniel system. That'll be interesting to see. But I think you're absolutely right.
Did you know his nickname was Snoop? I just saw it. It was like Snoop.
I did know that. I
had no idea. When did that happen? Usually I know all the nicknames.
It's happened. It's happened. Shout out to the guys at Baltimore Beatdown. I got a couple friends on that site. It's the best source of Ravens news and fantasy advice anywhere. But they've referred to him as Snoop before. I thought the other interesting one was Nelson Aguilar, that Harbaugh calls him Nelly. And I'm like, what? Like, I've never heard anybody call this guy Nelly, and Harbaugh's just talking about Nelly.
That's a good one.
So it's a nice nickname. So
were they going all 90s rappers or their nicknames for those guys?
Shout out to Nelly.
Is there a Biggie on that team? Is there a Biggie?
Biggie predates. Biggie's 1990s. You're getting your decades confused.
Snoop
there.
is 1990s, and so is and Nelly is late 90s.
Is Nelly late
90s?
Early
2000s.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
The grill and all that.
It's getting hot here. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do a little bit of going back to the NFC South. Atlanta Falcons, what a drive to end the game to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. But before that, if that game ends differently, if Saquon Barkley catches that pass, Alan, then you're looking at Atlanta's offense just being in like a fantasy misery. Like the Drake London drafters were ecstatic when he caught that touchdown at the end of the game. It was sort of like a sigh of relief type moment. But again, it was like the sliding doors where he almost didn't get an opportunity to catch that. It was almost 2 bad games in a row. Ray McLeod was out producing Pitts and London at halftime of last game. Where are you at on this Atlanta Falcons offense? We had so much enthusiasm in the fantasy community, maybe a little too much based on how we were rating this offense. Bijan was RB2 overall in ADP. Drake London was going at the 1-2 turn. Kyle Pitts had steamed up in ADP. Some mixed returns, Alan.
Yeah, Bijan Robinson's not even a top 12 running back on the season right now, right? It's kind of scary. You're obviously not worried about that at all. That should correct itself. But by the way, what was that thing that Drake London did? I didn't even understand what he was doing that it got penalized. Like, was it shooting a gun?
Was it shooting a gun? But then one of the coaches was saying that
I thought
it was like a t-shirt. It was like a t-shirt gun reference.
Good spin.
The way he was shooting it. But
right. No, it was a gun. It was a gun. Like that's a good spin. I love the spin. I love like the backtrack. But yeah, I guess violent, this, that. I mean,
but still, to make that be a Younghoe Koo extra point attempt that was like 50 yards long is insane to me. That's sort of like that's the penalty. That was insane. That was almost like the fix was in kind of deal.
You could always count on a Younghoe. I mean, that's
you love it. You love it, Alan. You love it. So,
yeah.
So kind of, where are you at on London, first of all? Do you like
it's fine?
Bijan, we're not worried. But
London, Bijan, we're not worried. London, it's like you're playing him every week, and you have to. It's like Garrett Wilson, right, on the Jets. Like it hasn't been there, but you're playing every week. I'm not ready to. If someone wants to overpay you for London, which I can't even imagine there's any league where that's ever going to happen, you're just putting him in your lineup every week, and you're hoping it gets better and better and better because there's no preseason anymore. I mean, so it takes a couple games for the rust to shake off, Theo. But I think the one conclusion I'm coming to right now, and I'm already asking I remember last week I asked you a start set question. I said Brian Thomas or Kyle Pitts in premium. And, I landed on Brian Thomas there. Like I am not playing. Pitts needs to show me something more than just like a random touchdown. I'm like almost ready to call him a bust relative to where he was drafted.
Oh, he's looking a huge bust where he was drafted. Like the target share, the air yard share too, Alan, where he's not like we were told that he was going to be used as a downfield target. And that totally made sense. London can win the intermediate routes. Bijan underneath. Let's run Kyle Pitts down the seam at least sometimes. And the air yards share has been so low. For me, it's like Kyle Pitts is just not being featured in this offense. We heard the rumblings he was out of shape this summer. Where maybe we should have listened to those ones.
Well, let me ask you this right now. Like you have both of these guys on your team. You have Kyle Pitts or Mike Gesicki, who looked like every bit the athlete we were told he was when he was drafted like 7 years ago. 7 targets for 91 yards. Bengals trending up. Are you starting Mike Gesicki, who's available on every waiver wire, or are you starting Kyle Pitts?
So I'm not there. I can't do the like random guy off the. I know it's not.
He's not random. He was.
I know he had 9 targets. He had 7 catches.
Oh, yeah,
I had Gesicki. I wrote about him in my waiver wire article. I don't know. It feels like
So
Gesicki also could have had the touchdown catch in week 1.
Well, it was.
I don't know.
They said they made a mistake on that. By the way, the NFL came back and said that was a catch, and that it should have been counted, and the refs made a mistake. That was a definitive statement by the NFL. And imagine how all those people that got booted in Circa Survivor feel right now.
Oh my gosh, that's awful. But yeah, for me, I don't know. I can't get there. I think Gesicki is a high-end tight end too this week until we see otherwise. Until we get a fully healthy T. Higgins. He's a thing.
If somebody was to trade me Gesicki, and I would give them Pitts, but I would get I'm just down like receivers, right? And I would get a receiver back in that deal. So I'm saying like redraft trades very seldom happen, but let's just say, for example, like DJ Moore and Gesicki for Pitts, right? Like someone's down, they want DJ Moore off their. I'm just thinking someone that's like that, right? Like George Pickens is 42 on the wide receiver rankings for the season so far. Would you take Gesicki and Pickens if you needed to fill a lineup spot and give away Kyle Pitts, or do you want to hold on to Pitts in your 1.5 premium league?
Gesicki and DJ Moore for me. I think I'm taking that deal. I think that you just kind of nailed it with
that can get done. Can get done.
It's a sad time. We'll remain and see, what we're going to do with Pitts rest of the year. Big tilting week for him this week for sure. It's Kansas City Chiefs against Atlanta. So this was the Isaiah Likely outburst in week 1 and also the Gesicki outburst in week 2. That's a tilting one if we don't see something out of Pitts there. What about Chris Godwin? This Tampa Bay offense, 2-0. They destroy the Panthers week 1. And then they get the tough win over the Detroit Lions. Chris Godwin is being used in just an exceptional manner. 65% of the time he's in the slot. Got away from that last year. We're seeing air yards. He's averaging like 24 points a game. Really like Cooper Kupp-like performance from Godwin so far. Just how highly do you rank him sort of this week? And is this something that's sustainable for the season? Obviously not a top 5 wide receiver, but can he give you this low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 production throughout the season?
I would almost say, Theo, we got to think bigger than this with Chris Godwin. He's already been wide receiver 2 overall in fantasy. I know it was like 4 years ago, whenever it was, maybe even 5, but it's happened already, and he's still in his athletic peak. Listen to a couple obvious numbers here, okay? 16 targets in the 2 games, caught 15 of them for 200 yards and 1 touchdown. And let's go back to the preseason when we were talking about Liam Cohn coming over, and you just mentioned in the Cooper Kupp role. I mean, athletic, maybe Cooper Kupp's just this pure technician, but he's a little bit older now, and just pure ability, athletic ability. Chris Godwin in that role has got to be better. And look, Baker Mayfield, man, he's a good quarterback, right? You would almost think like the Browns are probably wishing they still had him at this point instead of Deshaun Watson. They gave up on Baker too quick. So but yes, Chris. No, if I was ranking Chris Godwin, I would take Chris Godwin over Garrett Wilson for the rest of the season. So I would have him firmly inside my top 6 or 7 wide receivers.
No, that's definitely a bold statement there. I'm there. Like I traded for Chris Godwin. I had a
you got a good one. I
got a nice trade. I traded Mark Andrews. And I got Godwin and Pitts.
Here's a decision that a lot of fantasy managers had to make, and they flip-flopped in week 2, right? You were on the board. You were on the clock, and go back to about a month ago, people, when you were drafting. You were on the clock. You were staring at Jaden Reed and Chris Godwin. You picked one of them, and when you picked Jaden Reed, you thought you hit the lotto, baby, in week 1, and you're like, oh, the guys that took Godwin were like, why did I do that? And now you're like, wait a minute. Rest of season rankings. You're on the clock right now. We're starting over from scratch. The Jordan Love situation. He could be back. He might not be back. Which one of those receivers, Godwin or Jaden Reed, which one do you think is going to be the better bet rest of season?
Well, I think it's going to be Godwin because it's going to be more sustainable week to week, but I do think Jaden Reed is awesome.
And take one.
And Alan, I'll say this, that's actually was one of the most fruitful ranges. This we're going to have to look back at mid-season, but that's anybody who follows my work, I've always talked about like the money zone for wide receiver drafting. And that's the money zone, guys. Those high-end, wide receiver 3s, low-end wide receiver 2 range. These guys were all high-end wide receiver threes, or in some cases low-end wide receiver threes. But JSN, Godwin, Jaden Reed, Jamison Williams, all within, the similar tier to one another, and all of them have completely smashed. A very interesting.
So back to your question though, if you're re-ranking these guys, Chris Godwin's got to be what, 7, 9, 12? I mean, how where would you put him rest of the season?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes an interesting question when you start looking at him versus like the Brandon Ayuk's versus the Chris Olave's. Like, yeah,
that's not even close to me.
Like Devonta Smith or Chris Godwin.
Chris Godwin is ready for a top 5 wide receiver finish. He's done it already. Devontae Smith, well, now with AJ Brown out, Smith has got a chance, right? But I just don't think anyone's like in love with how the Eagles are operating right now. And everyone, look, Tampa is firing on all cylinders right now, especially for fantasy football. There's some pushback. They shouldn't have won that Lions game. They did because they have and by the way, and Chris Godwin, I mean, it's possible. What was the year that, remember, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp both smashed, right? This is looking a lot like that for Evans and Godwin.
I think that's a really great point. And it takes a strong quarterback play. And Baker Mayfield, he gave us QB1 production last year, and then nobody valued him in that range. And Baker is continuing to play at a high level. So this Tampa Bay team, I think, is very, very strong. And I think that they drafted well. Those additions of Bucky Irving and Jalen McMillan also add depth and make this offense a little bit better at different levels. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think Godwin's here to stay. I think he's a player you should be kicking the tires on and
quote unquote
you could trade high.
Yeah,
buy high before the market adjusts.
And what we mean by that is like, okay, would you trade Jamar Chase for Godwin and, like, say you needed a running back, say like David Montgomery? Would you give Jamar Chase and get Godwin and Montgomery back?
I probably think I could get a little bit more than that, Alan.
But would you do that one? What if that was your best offer? Is that a no?
In redraft?
Yeah, redraft. You need a running back, right? There's no running backs. You're like looking at Carson Steele on the waiver wire. You get Montgomery. He's been 17 points a game. But you basically, do you think you're going to lose much on the Chase Godwin exchange?
I mean, I'm an ageist, so it's hard for me to take on 2 older players for a younger player. But I think that's the sort of trade you need to make if you're going to try to pivot off. And I think that trade is absolutely right there for you in redraft leagues, especially with Washington on the horizon for Cincinnati. So, Alan, I want to talk to you about Brock Bowers, which is a player that on the Sonic Truth podcast and really anytime we talked about this rookie class and this dynasty class, this is a player that I was ecstatic about. And I feel very smart on this one so far because he looks like he's going to be feeding families with his fantasy production for years. Your initial reaction to Brock Bowers and also your initial reaction to this Raiders offense where they can't run the ball at all. And Gardner Minshew's had back-to-back weeks with 250 plus, passing yards, which is nothing like insane, but at least it's a consistent number where we can project Brock Bowers and then Devontae Adams, whatever he's at his stage in his career. Those two guys are going to get targeted, and those guys can be just guys we can like put in our lineup and have an expectation of their usage.
Yeah, Scott Pianowski over at Yahoo Sports cited a stat that I thought was pretty cool. In the preseason, Gardner Minshew was throwing 48%, and now he's like over 75%. So, like what you saw in the preseason, it had no application to the regular season for Minshew. But I guess, like, again, those are the descriptive stats. But we've seen Minshew support fantasy wide receivers before. So, like, that should have been the takeaway. And there was a lot. And even when Brock Bowers landed in the Raiders, I think, Theo, you were one of the only few people out there saying it was actually not just a not bad spot. You were like, oh, no, I like this spot. This is going to be good. Yeah.
I mean, the idea is you're going to get off a plane in Vegas next summer, and there's going to be a 100-foot big old picture of Brock Bowers in like the airport welcoming you to Vegas when Devontae Adams moves on and Brock Bowers is in like the Travis Kelce role for years to come. The guy's got a pathway to also becoming their number one target this year, Alan. If they trade, like they're going to go 2-1, they're going to beat Carolina this weekend. I feel confident saying that. That might be a circa play for you this weekend, Alan.
Well, by the way, just so I'm fading the Raiders because they're going to be so high owned.
They will be.
Yeah, and I don't trust them. But yes, but you're right. I mean, they're likely to win. There's
likely to win.
Yeah.
But if it falls apart and they move Devontae Adams near the trade deadline, then you're also going to have Brock Bowers as the number one target in the fantasy playoffs. So like Brock Bowers, like all these and not to disparage some other sites, but I think like we speak to a more educated audience on our show than maybe some podcasts.
Well, more experienced players. I think that's
okay. That's fine. More experienced players, guys who played fantasy longer. Some of these podcasts are like, I'm making my bold take. Brock Bowers is a top 5 tight end for me this week, or I'm bold. Like we had one podcast who will say remain nameless that gets a ton of people watching, where the guy was talking in week 1 about if Brock Bowers is available on waivers, you have to like go get. And I'm like, dude, who plays in these fantasy leagues?
Dude,
like, what are we talking about?
We had one worse. I had to smack a guy at Rotowire, the company I work for, and it got straightened out, right? Because he did a preseason waiver wire article that never got published, where he was telling people sleeper tight ends was Trey McBride, right? And I said, fire this guy immediately, right? I'm kidding. Obviously, the guy, he just hadn't. I guess he just wasn't understanding what was going on here. I was like, no.
Did you sue
tight
him?
end 3?
Is litigation pending?
Yeah. Oh, wait. Yeah.
No, you're going to sue the guy, right?
Yeah. But I'm saying I hear what you're saying. I think sometimes we take for granted now that, Player Profiler has a very experienced, sophisticated users, but 95% of people that play fantasy football are more super casual, right? So that is why they say if Brock Bowers. And now again, he was tight end 7 in even in like the ESPN applet. So there's no way he was on waivers. And he was a brand name coming out of college. So like he was probably drafted like in the 4th round in some leagues that like followed, the big college schools.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just a general, like, if this is the sort of, if you're uncomfortable with your Dalton Kincaid, uncomfortable with your Travis Kelce, you're still going to have managers who are willing to make that trade with you because they have take lock still from redraft season. The whole notion that things are going to get better because this guy was so much higher drafted, that still exists with some people in week 3. Even an more educated fantasy football average consumer, you're still going to have people with redraft take lock, aren't you, Alan?
Dude, I'm trying to find Travis Kelce on the tight end seasonal rankings. I can't even find him here.
You can't find him. He's
how deep does it go? I'm up to 30. Where the hell is he?
He's got about as many catches this season as his brother does.
No, but I'm serious. What number is he?
Probably like tight end 48. He's got like 1 catch last week.
I'm telling you, I think he's lower than that.
Yeah. There's a pathway for like Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce being a little more game scripted into the first quarter without a viable running back. But like Travis Kelce, it looks like they're just kind of having him jog out there and then having him be ready for the AFC playoffs. And
oh my God, this is wild, Theo. I mean, tight end. I mean, he went tight end 1 off the board in redraft, right? Or tight end 2, depending on if you took. LaPorta. How about LaPorta? I know you didn't ask me about LaPorta, but are you comfortable starting him every week still?
Well, I think you sort of have to. And LaPorta, it hasn't like completely fallen off. The guy's got 8 catches on the year, 60 receiving yards. But the thing that concerns me about LaPorta is like the target share is like 10% lower than that. And the air yards are not there. Like the Jameson Williams has been a massive detriment to Sam LaPorta. But we did see the offense change from week 1 to week 2. Amon-Ra St. Brown just gets peppered in week 2. You've got to think that there's going to be a game coming up where it's a get-right environment for LaPorta. On the flip side with LaPorta, the route participation, the routes run, he's on the field all the time, and it's a guy we know. For me, it's like LaPorta, you just get down to a point where how low can you rank him? Because he's good at football, and we sort of trust the offense to get right. He's behind Brock Bowers for me this week, though, and not just in Dynasty and redraft as well. McBride is worlds ahead of LaPorta. But at the end of the day, like you take LaPorta over. I mean, Alan, the tight end's been a train wreck right now.
Right. Yeah. There's Gesicki is the example. Like, wait a second. What if, every year there's like tight end 18 in ADP or tight end 20 ends up being like tight end 4 or 7. It just seems like Gesicki is the obvious answer to me. And by the way, Travis Kelce, tight end 28. I must have skipped over his name. So
yeah, he's playing very poorly. But bottom line is, my big take last week, I can't even remember which podcast, but it was that Brock Bowers, even if you drafted another tight end and Bowers was your tight end 2, you have to put him in the flex every week because he's going to give you like solid wide receiver like usage He's already playing the slot. He's already getting targets, and he's just super talented at football. I think you're going to have a week.
Who would you play him over? He has no. I mean, he's tight end 1, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Well,
yeah, George Kittle would be tight end 1 for me this week, I guess.
So that's a great segue, Alan. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but we lost Deebo Samuel. Christian McCaffrey is already lost. Jordan Mason has been getting exceptional volume. You can't really increase Jordan Mason's usage. And Brandon Ayuk has been incredibly slow out the gate. How does this 49ers offense look now with no Deebo, with no CMC, and in a game where this should be a very positive game for them this week against LA? Yeah,
this might be my Circa Survivor team, by the way. San Fran on the road, they're still about almost a touchdown favorite. And because they're LA fans, there's no real LA Rams fans, right? Like, so I would say this stadium is going to be what, 60% San Fran fans?
Yeah,
is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
Right. So George Kittle, he'll do whatever they want him to do. If they want him to block, play fullback, or catch passes. This sets up. I think this is one of those like 7 catches for 140 yards, 2 touchdown upside weeks for George Kittle. Now, Brock Purdy hasn't been like great, but he's good enough, right? And I've never seen a team more banged up than the LA Rams. And so if I land on San Fran this week in Circa Survivor, where you put $1,000 in, the prize is 14 million, Theo. 14 freaking million.
We worked out a deal. If Alan wins and takes it down, I get a nice watch. So next year, if you see me with like a Shadur Sanders like piece on my wrist, it's Alan.
Well, I did in full disclosure, I did ask you to be my partner this thing. I know, and you're a total coward.
No, it wasn't cowardly. I was at the time I was I was draft season. It was all these main events, and I'm like, Alan, let me look at it. And then you got somebody else.
Excuses are like a-holes, baby. Everyone has them. Right. Most of them stink, you know?
Yeah, and I'll also say that like, I love the 49ers this week. I think George Kittle is the big beneficiary for Deebo Samuel being out. You're going to see a lot more stuff schemed for him, a chance for him to use his yak ability. Ayuk will get it together, but I think the sneaky start this week is Juwan Jennings. They paid Juwan Jennings in the offseason. Juwan Jennings is a guy where I picked him up on some waiver wires, NFFC, FFPC type teams. I had him in my column. We talked about waivers earlier this week, Alan, and I was just like, Juwan Jennings is a guy that I think is going to benefit.
Well, let me give you a couple either ors with Juwan Jennings, because this is you talked about actionable info on this podcast. Yeah. People have this one. So if you're sitting there and Tank Dell has been stinking it up for you, starting Juwan Jennings over Tank Dell?
That's an interesting one.
That's a real choice people have.
So Tank Dell's giving you almost a 20% target share in the Houston offense. I think that number is going to creep up slightly, and Tank Dell was a big play away. I think it all depends on your team context. I think they're closer than some people imagine.
Well,
I think
team context. I need a third receiver, and I'm looking at Juwan Jennings, and I'm looking at Tank Dell, and I'm asking which one of those guys should. Or do you percentage it? Say, hey, I would. You know
what? I'll stick to my guns here. It's going to be Tank Dell.
Yes.
I think I'm not there yet, but I think if you're in a position where you need a flex, maybe a little bit further down, maybe an injury fill-in, Juwan Jennings. I think Juwan Jennings is probably for me like a little bit lower down in the wide receiver 3 range.
Couple other names, Theo. Because people are going to have these decisions. You get asked probably the most start-sit questions of anybody I know. So these are type of questions. If you're sitting there and just go rapid fire, I'll ask you: Khalil Shakir or Jennings?
Give me Jennings.
All right, and the last one I'll say is if you picked up Quentin Johnston off the 2 touchdown performance, him or Jennings?
That's going to be neck and neck for me.
Okay.
I do think Johnston has the higher upside, but he's got the more difficult matchup.
All right. So that's it. That's how we're playing the 49ers. We're starting Jordan Mason, George Kittle. We're like happy to shove him in our lineup. And Jennings is there if you need him as a third receiver. It sounds like you like his floor more than his ceiling, which is fine.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing you got to understand when you're playing these guys. They're sort of off the wire. You're playing fill-ins where it's just Jennings can get there, but it's got to be touchdown catches. And that he's capable of doing that in this offense. So Jennings is one where it's sort of like a company guy. They reward him with the contract. And I don't think they just reward him with the contract because of the indecision with Brandon Ayuk. I think it's because of situations like this, where if Ayuk or Deebo miss time, he might have similar target usage. Obviously, a more of a capped upside guy than those two, but Jennings is a fun one to add. If he's a free square, you can go grab him as a a free pickup off the wire right now, and like a lot of leagues he is, I would scoop him up before this weekend. I think if anything, he'll be a more highly sought after waiver wire target next week. Let's stay in the NFC West. Ryan Grubb's first week without Ken Walker. Ken Walker might be really banged up here, Alan. And we had a 69% of the plays went for a pass. Was crazy to see that for a Seattle team. And we had 30 combined targets for DK and JSN. Both of those guys get you 20 plus PPR points. Geno, the most completions, the most pass attempts he's ever had in a game in his career. You have to feel pretty happy about what Ryan Grubb has been able to do this Seattle offense as a fantasy manager.
Yeah, DK Metcalf proved that he still has alpha upside, even though that certain weeks it's not going to be there. He's not like the most consistent alpha, but he's deserving of where you draft him. JSN, he went off on your bench last week. No problem. That's fine. You want to see that. So this week you're putting him in your lineup, right? Like you don't get pissed when someone like that goes off on your bench because now you've seen it and now you put him in there. And Tyler Lockett, who I started in a couple leagues, it's like, it didn't work out this past week, but he drew the big pass interference at the end that could have been caught for a touchdown, and he played so in a deeper league where you have Lockett on your bench, you could start him. It's no problem. But I think I like what you said here. Like, was Geno Smith not like one of the best picks in Superflex this year?
I mean, Geno looks terrific right now, and it's not a matter of like we haven't seen the fantasy explosion, but the pass volume for him, the comfort level in the offense, and the fact that now Ken Walker's not there. Like Zach Charbonnet is a pass catcher out of the backfield. Say what you want about Charbonnet. Charbonnet catches the ball well out of the backfield. I know there's some people like shout out Billy Muzio here, player profiler, not a huge Zach Charbonnet guy, but Charbonnet is going to run a lot of routes. He's going to get significant amount of targets out of the backfield. I think he's a locked in like top 15 play this week and every week that Walker misses. So I'm very happy about this offense. Obviously JSN, the big winner, like as much of a positive for fantasy managers to see Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr., especially dynasty managers last week. Like JSN, that's what we've been waiting for. Him being peppered with targets and producing with those targets. That's the important thing. It's not just that he got the targets. It's that he caught those, like the 12 passes. He gives you all the yardage. And it just shows that Geno's willing to target him at a high rate and they're willing to dial his number up. I didn't look at like how many of those were first read, but seemed like just watching the game, it seemed like quite a few of them were JSN routes, JSN primary targets.
Why is first read so important to you? Because I hear that stat being popped up a lot now. Like, does it mean like he's the priority look, so he's going to get more targets?
I think for me, it's not necessarily static because defensive coverages can kind of take away the first read. Certain defenses are better at that. Yeah. But for me, first read is a really strong stat because it just shows where the offensive coordinator's mind is at. Where the QB's at, and it's sort of like this is designed for this guy. It's sort of like target share. Like we can't predict fantasy points every week, but if we know a guy's going to get a 28% target share, we feel super comfortable. If guys are getting a lot of first read looks, I like looking at that one. We should have a whole stats episode, Alan, just for you.
Yeah, no, I don't mind it. I just like to know, like a lot of people that like to post about stats on social media, which again, it's totally cool, but there's really no context or explanation. And I don't consider myself a casual. I consider myself somebody who has been playing football a lot, but I don't understand some of the stats, like, and how they apply, right? Like, it's just like mind numbing, right? Like it almost seems like content for the sake of content. And I'm sure there is more meaning there, but what can I do with that? Give me something. This is my advice to anyone that loves posting stats on social media is give me something that applies that after I've watched the game. Like I already saw Jackson Smith and Jigba. He got his 12 receptions last week, right? But I like what you said. That's why I asked the follow-up question. That's why I started a podcast, Theo, because I want to ask the questions to football analysts that weren't being asked. So you said these first look targets, right? First read targets.
First read.
First read targets. So I said, what does that mean? Now you explained it. Now I said, oh, okay. That means that he's proactively being targeted. Okay. That makes sense to me. Right. So I think some context needs to be applied with that stuff so everyone can digest it. And you just did a great job of that.
No, I appreciate that for sure. Let's go rapid fire. Mm-hmm. Which Rams wide receiver should be in your lineup this week? And if you had to just pick one of them for your roster to have over the next 6 weeks, who would it be?
I mean, is it crazy to say Tutu Atwell is just as likely as any of the other ones, which, by the way, I don't think it's going to be him. But why? I mean, Jordan Whittington's the fun, upside, unknown one. Tyler Johnson got heavily targeted in week 1. Colby Parkinson had a down week, but everyone liked him in the preseason. And then, of course, Demarcus Robinson is like produced in this system. Problem is the offensive line. The answer might be like they might get 9 points on 3 field goals here. If I have to pick one, I'll take the boring Demarcus Robinson, but I have no problem if it's anybody else there.
I think you nailed it. I think this is one where you want to have access to this wide receiver room on your fantasy roster just in case you hit on the one. I would say for me, I agree with you. It's boring old Demarcus Robinson because we've seen him do it in that stretch for Baltimore. We saw him do it last year where he had like 5 weeks in a row with a touchdown catch or like 6-7 targets every week or both. And he has continued to get end zone targets from Stafford.
I would sit Stafford this week. I would give him the week off. I would just be like, Jimmy Garoppolo, it's your first week back. You're in. Let's go.
I actually went kind of retroactive, and I'm willing to. I kind of got rid of Stafford, and I had him as my QB2 on a number of these 20-man roster teams. He was sort of my preferred QB2 target, but I'm perfectly comfortable going from a Stafford to a Sam Darnold type quarterback right now as my QB2, Alan.
You can't do that. Sam Darnold, You mean on the waiver wire or a trade?
Oh, on the waiver wire.
Oh, yeah. Darnold should have been picked up already. He's a top, 5 fantasy quarterback?
Darnold was there in a lot of cleanups last week. Geno Smith was a lot of cleanups. Derek Carr was still in a lot of cleanups. And Derek Carr I missed out on because, he went – some leagues I picked him up, but some leagues was way too expensive. But, I churned through Stafford. Stafford and Justin Herbert are the two that, if you had him on as your QB2 – churn them out. Trevor Lawrence really struggling there. There's a really opportunity. This is like the time of year where guys have redraft take lock and they hold their quarterback too long and they get boxed out on the waiver wire and they miss out. Like last year, CJ Stroud, we were so pounding the table at Player Profiler to go pick him up after week 1 on the waiver wire. Jordan Love, a couple of these other guys we were really pounding the table for, and people just sort of were like, nah, our guys are going to get it together. And then you get stuck holding the bag.
Yeah, no, by the way, I just looked up on the NFFC my Carson Steele bid. I bid 189, so 18.9, won it. The next guy, he must be on such tilt right now. Bill bid 188, 1/100th of a dollar off.
You got to tweet that out. That's just the biggest, like one of the most rewarding feelings in fantasy. Yeah, let's finish it out with this one. Zay Flowers' target share. We've seen him have double-digit targets back-to-back weeks. The ADOT, the average depth of target went way up last week. Like first week against Kansas City, people were brushing it off because it was all like a lot of dink and dunk. He had 10 targets, but he had minimal fantasy production. But week 2 seemed to have a big step forward. They were targeting more downfield. Zay Flowers looks like another ADP steal, Alan. Is this is the Zay Flowers sort of passing game offense? Or is it going to be Mark Andrews makes a comeback and sort of usurps that number 1 role?
I'm so pissed because I would love Zay Flowers on so many of my teams right now. And the one team I have him on, I haven't even started him in 2 weeks because I have like Nico Collins and I think in Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's a 2-receiver league. And even in the flex spots where I have like running backs. So all that great production you're talking about has been sitting on my bench. Obviously that's changing this week. He was going in the 3rd round in when he was pushed up in the 4th in most leagues.
Yeah, like NFFC 4th, and then some of these other leagues maybe the 5th.
Right, because the tight end premium stuff.
He steamed up. But there was a lot of people in the industry who were anti-Zay Flowers, and I was always like, on all these pods, I'm like, I don't understand it. It's sort of the idea that Todd Monken kind of gets it. This seems like a forward-thinking guy who did very well at Georgia, now is doing very well, except for that one playoff loss. Like his tenure has been a massive positive success. And the idea that he wouldn't ramp up Flowers was one that I never quite understood. Also with the wide receiver target competition is so minimal there, Alan.
Yeah. And Flowers, by the way, was one of those players, even if you're the prospect evaluators, that people loved him because he didn't go to the Senior Bowl. He went to, what was the other name of the bowl that he went to?
Shrine Bowl,
right? Oh, wait, what is this? And then all of a sudden he stood out there and he moved up draft boards. He went from being somebody that people liked to a 1st round real NFL draft pick. He had exactly the rookie season you want, right? Somebody that shows up and then he was just kind of like a boring pick because people don't like the Ravens offense, but I feel like Zay Flowers would be good. Imagine what Zay Flowers would be like on Buffalo. He'd be I mean, it would be ridiculous, right?
And yeah, there's about a dozen teams right now where you could put Zay Flowers on and the target share would be similar.
Yeah, no, Zay Flowers, if we redrafted today, I say that because it's like, where are we at today? I mean, he'd be a clear 2-3 turn pick. And maybe he's going down as like a boring pick, like how we used to think of Tyler Lockett in his prime. Like, who wants to take him? Who wants to take Jarvis Landry at the end of the second round? But that's kind of what Zay Flowers is. He's getting targeted. We like Lamar Jackson. Ravens offense should hopefully be fine. I mean, they have a big game this week, but yeah, man, I love that you called out Zay Flowers. That is a strong pick that people weren't even thrilled to make.
Well, another strong pick I had was having Alan Seslowsky on as my guest. Alan, you crush it every time you're here at press coverage, Dynasty Life, Sonic Truth. You're sort of everywhere here at the Player Profile. You were even on Wake and Take the other day. Let everybody know again where they can find your work.
If you're on Twitter, it's at Alan Seslowsky, but Rotowire YouTube page is where it can be found. And then if you have satellite radio in the car and you're driving around Sunday mornings, just flip on the fantasy channel, 87, 9 o'clock. We're there just talking smack. Yeah.
And stick with us here at press coverage. We got you covered all season long right here at Player Profiler. Check out First Class Fantasy with Billy Muzio. I have coming on later this week. And another podcast. I'm starting to do School of Scott with Scott Barrett. That's over at the Fantasy Points channel. So you can check that out at Fantasy Points, where you get your podcast, School of Scott, Theo Gremminger, and Scott Barrett every single week. We will see you soon. Let's crush it this weekend.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.